Hello, welcome to the final third online session we're having for care this year. This is a session on care with and for horses, and there are going to be 4 papers. They will come one after the other, and then we will open up for Q&A after that. So I'll introduce our first 2 speakers or 2 presenters. So we've got Alex Franklin, who is Professor of Social Sustainability Science at the Centre for Agroecology, Water and Resilience at Coventry University. Her research explores collaborative forms of environmental action and care, with a particular focus on place-based practice, situated knowledge and more than human relations. And she's presenting with Nora Schuurman, who is an Academy Research Fellow at the University of Turku. She specialises in human-animal relationality, equestrianism and pet culture, especially questions concerning space, agency, care and death. She currently studies interspecies care practices in her project Landscapes of Interspecies Care, working the human-animal boundary in care practices. So I'll hand over to Alex and Nora.
Lovely, thanks, Erica. Can you hear me okay and see the presentation, hopefully? Okay, perfect. So today Nora and I are presenting on practicing a responsible ethic of interspecies care, trying to become with well in support of equine rescue and rehabilitation. In this presentation, we focus on encounters and relationships between humans and rescue horses. That is, between abandoned, abused or unwanted horses that have been brought to the care of one of several horse rescue organisations operating in the UK. We present findings aimed at informing understanding not only of how to care for and with rescue horses, but also more broadly about the circumstances in which animals and humans are able to begin relearning how to become with and respond to one another in a mutually rewarding way. Becoming responsive to one another in a manner supportive of good care requires what Dupre refers to as a willingness to make available oneself to the other, as we will show by exploring the willingness of individual rescue animals to make themselves available to rescue yard staff. We are in turn able to better understand the role of animal agency in the practicing of interspecies ethics of care. If it lets me change it. Okay, so before going on to explain the main conceptual pillars of the presentation, let me begin by first introducing the key characteristics of the empirical study upon which the presentation is based. So the study focused on horse rescue, rehabilitation and rehoming practices in the UK. During the autumn of 2019, whilst we were still able to, luckily, we undertook in-depth semi-structured interviews with a total of 19 members of staff across 9 different rescue yards. In all cases, the interviews were undertaken in person by Nora and myself and included a guided tour of the rescue yard by one or more of the individuals interviewed. The interviews ranged from 30 minutes to over 3 hours and were digitally recorded and transcribed verbatim. 2 main research questions, which you can see on the screen, were used to guide the initial round of analysis supporting the development of this presentation and the associated journal paper. The first was how do situated interspecies processes of getting to know the other unfold on a rescue yard? And the second is how do humans working with the horses develop an understanding of the horse as an individual and an agent with or perhaps without a future? In working with the term animal agency in this presentation, we understand it to include their subjective experience and actions with which they convey to other humans and animals their feelings, emotions and perceptions in ways that are characteristic of them, not only in terms of a species, but also as individuals. As we will show, the case of rescue horses and the associated space rescue yards provides a unique lens for observing how humans and animals get to know and become with each other, but also how their individual agency in turn shapes their respective abilities to care with each other. Drawing especially on the scholarship of Joan Tronto, Maria Puig de la Bella Casa, we understand the notion of caring with as foregrounding trust, solidarity and reciprocity in caring relations. These foundational elements are co-constituted and performed by the caregivers with the care receivers, not simply for them. Caring with ethics thus also simultaneously emphasizes attentiveness and responsiveness to different needs and responsibilities, or to what Donna Haraway helpfully refers to as responsibilities. Within the everyday, the active nurturing of responsibilities is achieved in many ways, including through doing together, being together, through touch, through gaze, and listening to each other. But also more symbolically, caring with is about being curious. It is about becoming situationally responsible to each other's processes of meaning making, understanding, and needs in a way which enables and sustains the practicing of a mutually rewarding relationship of care, both now and in the future.
Caring with someone in a careful relationship requires knowing the other, and knowing the animal involves understanding them as agents of their own life, with unique ways of relating to their environment and other actors in it and their individual life history. As Linda Burke and Kirili Thompson aptly note, animals living with humans are often flexible with their agency, including creativity and ability to surprise their human companions. For insights on how to approach the agency of horses living at rescue yards in relationships of care and mutual becomings with humans, we draw on the writings of Vincent Després and Michel de Certeau. Often at the horse rescue yard, the life history of an individual animal is not known. Many horses taken into rescue yards have previously been abused, unhandled, or accustomed only to infrequent herd-based encounters with humans. This has potential bearing on how the horse will be encountered and come to be known and cared for and with. It is therefore up to the human to imagine a past and present for them by interacting with the horse, reading their actions and bodily messages for signs of discomfort, insecurity, fear, or trust. The grooms working with the horses use their own body as a tool for learning to know how to interact with the horse, when to approach, touch, and ask for a response. They thus learn from and with the horses as opposed to only learning about them. This is a direct mode of relating to the animal other. You can tell the difference between the ones who are petrified of you because they have never been handled and the ones that have had that bad handling.
In practice, the experience of becoming with an animal other is situated in time and space. It constitutes of embodied communication, shared encounters and experiences, being affected by each other, and where mutual responsibility is achieved, a feeling of togetherness, a feeling of what Kirili Thompson refers to as being us. As Haraway reminds us, partners do not pre-exist their relating. Partners are precisely what come out of the inter and intra-relating of fleshy, significant, semiotic material being. At the same time, however, in order for the process of becoming to result in mutual transformation, both human and animal need first to be willing and able to make themselves available to the other. Indeed, in the context of an interspecies relation of care, Desprez's notion of making available can be thought of as denoting a starting point for becoming responsible to caring with. Notably, though, in the case of rescue horses, even where past experiences, persistent fear and mistrust prove unmalleable to invitations for making oneself available to becoming with humans differently, this does not in itself constitute a failure of care. Rather, the response of a rescue horse to certain ways of being approached and handled becomes part of what that horse is understood and accepted to be and become. Associated rules and strategies are then put in place to try and avoid placing the horses in situations where the precarious trust that they have achieved may be lost once more. This extends to the ability of others, including future owners, to safely respond to their needs in moments which threaten to derail even the best of care plans. Even with such rules, strategies and plans in place, however, there remains an ongoing need for horse and human to continue fine-tuning their situated responsibilities to one another and to the not always predictable interventions of others besides. And as an example of this, as one of the respondents said to us, any horse, whether bought or rescued, could have a bad history. You might find out that one day you're out riding and a cat comes in front of you and the horse goes on its back legs, because that's the trigger for that horse.
Looking more closely at agency now, we find that according to Depre, agency does not appear in isolation. Instead, it is always situational and relational and takes the form of asking, inspiring, or making others do, move, or be inspired. In relationships between humans and animals, this means that animals with their agency shape human action and the relationship in itself. Depre points out that there is no agency that is not interagency. There are, however, limits set by humans to the expression of agency by animals, as well as to the extent to which their agency is understood and responded to by humans. We see an example of this in the data in the following quote. You might get to a certain stage, such as picking out their feed, and then not be able to progress from that. The agency of animals is often seen in their resistance to human action or a refusal to collaborate with humans. Yet, agency includes collaboration without visible action. In such cases, the animal may actively choose not to resist. Depre calls this secret agency. It is not openly demonstrated, but appears in the routines of collaboration and mutual dependency between humans and animals. Depre writes, when they do what they must so that everything happens as it is supposed to, we do not see this as a testimony to their willingness to do what is expected of them. As an example of this would be an action on the part of the horse or the horse's response to human action that could be understood as a decision to accept trust and agree to the relationship to proceed. The people working with horses at rescue yards have experience of this. They say others literally just need time, consistency, and gentleness and calmness. Then they soon come around. We soon find that they always take a deep breath and go, okay, this is fine. Then you can progress. The agency of horses in everyday practices of care can also be approached through the Certeau's concepts of strategies and tactics. According to the Certeau, those with no official power do not simply succumb to regulations and aspirations, that is, strategies of those in power. Instead, they use tactics in active and creative ways to find their own space. What is interesting here is that the use of tactics does not necessarily come in the form of opposition or rebellion. As an art of the weak, the use of tactics is more subtle. As in the previous quote, it can indicate a willingness to collaborate, but in a way that requires an attentiveness and responsiveness on the part of the human to the animal's needs and capabilities. Here is an account of how attentiveness and responsiveness to the horse can become part of a careful relationship. Not every member of staff takes to a horse So it's like with the riders, we will say, if you feel that the horse doesn't settle, is more sensitive with you, the other rider will try it out and see. Because obviously we want a good experience. We want the horse to get going first, and then it will accept, rather than you're pushing something that's clearly not working. So we've always got to have that flexibility to notice the subtle signs and sort of step back and then restart it.
Okay, so to conclude, a focus on daily ongoing practices such as care reveals the complexity of becoming with animals with attentiveness and responsiveness to the other's messages and agencies. Through the process of learning to know each other, becoming responsible and making oneself available to the other at a rescue yard, we can understand the nuances of interagency in careful interspecies relationships. Following Haraway, these mutual becomings appear as a dance of relating. In the context of a rescue yard, this is clearly a dance where steps are carefully taken. As such, the care practices studied resemble what De Soto calls tireless but quiet activity. Our study shows that by exploring the willingness of animals to make themselves available to humans, we are able to better understand the role of animal agency, that is, what they do and what they appear not to do in careful relationships. It is by advancing our understanding of an attentiveness to animal agency that we are in turn able to better understand what it means to become responsible to the needs and desires of the other in the daily relational practicing of an interspecies ethics of care.
Brilliant. Thank you very much indeed, the two of you. As I said, we will come back to Alex and Nora at the end when we have Q&As, and there's lots of applause going on there. Can I invite Rebecca? Becky, do you want to bring yourself up and share your screen? So Rebecca has worked as a vet in clinical practice and now is nearing the end of her PhD at the University of Liverpool. Rebecca's research explores the intersection of human-horse relationships, healthcare and ageing. She'll discuss some of her findings in today's talk. So Rebecca, that looks good to me. Do you want to go from here?
Great. Oh, thanks very much. Just, you can hear me. Yeah, have I taken myself off mute?
You're fine. You're all
Yeah,
right.
thank you. So thanks so much for joining today, everyone. And today I'm going to be talking about some of my PhD research findings. And I've been working on this research with a team at the University of Liverpool, and the work has been kindly funded by the Horse Trust. So today I'm going to be talking about the construction of veterinary care for older horses. So just as a bit of a background to my study, previous research has found that many people are caring for horses into increasingly older age, and the owners of these horses have really strong bonds with their aging horse, and often through this process they're making many adjustments to their care in terms of aspects like the way they exercise their horse or the way they feed their horse. But these studies have also found that as a horse gets older or is retired, there's often a reduction in presentation to a vet for routine preventative health care for things like vaccinations. So in my study, we really wanted to explore how owners were making kind of management decisions for their horses as they got older, and how veterinary care was situated within that model of care. So I've collected data from different sources over the past 3 years. So I've collected data from online equine community web pages where horse owners discussed queries or questions they had about decisions they were making for their horses' management. And I've also spoken to 25 owners of leisure horses from across the UK, where owners were keeping their horses in different kind of locations, private premises or livery yards, and owners with different experience. And I've spoken to these owners in in-depth semi-structured interviews. And then I've also recruited the vets that treat their horses. So I've spoken to 9 of the paired vets as well, as we wanted to understand what, from a vet's perspective, what their approach to older horse care looked like. And I've also looked at veterinary clinical records. So throughout this study, I've collected and analysed data using a constructivist grounded theory approach. So I really wanted to get an understanding of people's experiences and how they made decisions. And this has also enabled me to compare the data from owners and vets. So the role of veterinary care just played one part in a complex management picture for owners, but that's what I'm going to focus on talking about today. So both owners and vets are aiming to achieve what they feel is best for a horse, but the meaning of this in practice was really individual, and it was shaped by human, horse, environmental and other social factors, and how these all interacted at a point in time. So we found that owners were seeking veterinary services for routine care and problem-based consultations. So routine care involved things like vaccinations, dental assessment, and monitoring of chronic conditions in the horse. But as a horse's lifestyle changed, owners were constantly kind of prioritizing aspects of their horse's care. And sometimes for reasons such as the horse no longer leaving a private premises or perceived to not be interacting with so many horses, owners kind of reprioritized those vaccination visits, and for some they then became reduced as a horse got older, and this had consequences for interactions with vets. And outside of this routine care, owners sought veterinary advice for problem-based consults, but again an owner's understanding of what constituted a veterinary problem really individual, and it was shaped by an owner's experience with older horses and their relationships with vets and other professionals. So here we can see the factors which shaped a veterinary consultation from the vet's perspective. And we've got the vet factors on the blue and the owner factors in the yellow. And then all these factors were kind of interacting together. If you imagine these cogs turning, and during consultations, they co-constructed what is best for the horse. So from a vet's perspective, there was a reliance on owners seeking advice. And so the way in which owners presented an issue to them, so for, how they engaged with veterinary services, be that for routine or problem-based care, it shaped how vets perceived owners' relationship with their horse and owners' motivation, and that in turn shaped the vet's relationship with the owner. And we can see from this model that identifying problems and finding solutions was pivotal in consultations and shaped the understanding of what is best for the horse. And one really important factor which shaped how problems were identified was vet owner communication. And this was really important from vets and owners. And vets talked about kind of, particularly during vaccination visits, asking owners if they've had any problems, and they were relying on owners raising their concerns during those consultations, and that had consequences for what discussions took place. And this communication was really important for owners too, and it had consequences for longer term relationships. So this owner said about one vet, "They didn't ask me any questions at all about what they did and what they didn't do, and I found that really odd. And I said to Nathan, I don't think I'm going to like him as a vet. They've no interest whatsoever in anything about the horse. They just came down, gave him an injection and went." So we can see how this has shaped this vet owner relationship. So I'm not going to have time to talk about all parts of the model, but particularly from the vet's perspective, identifying problems was reliant on their assessment of a horse, and this was shaped through their medical training. But the way in which a vet's medical knowledge was applied in practice was shaped by all other factors in the model. And so, for one example, the way in which problems were identified and solutions sought was shaped by that vet's interaction with the owner and discussion around what was appropriate care. So one common endocrine disorder in older horses is PPID or Cushing's disease. And one vet spoke about his discussions with one particular owner who didn't feel it was appropriate to do these blood tests when she didn't feel a problem existed. But we can see from this owner's perspective that although she understood that she may have horses with Cushing's, she describes, this is a little bit of a debate we have. I'm sure with having older horses, possibly if we did the blood test, Oscar is always wanting to do a blood test to find out that I don't want to know, but I'm a bit, if anything is causing a problem, I'll really investigate. But I feel like if it's not actually causing a problem, we tend to just wait until we think there is something. I think because we're with them as much and we work with them, we pick up things quite early. So although from the veterinary perspective that this vet's understanding of a problem is shaped through his medical training, for this owner, through her close relationship with her horse, she feels that she can pick up when changes occur, and for her that shapes her understanding of when a problem exists that requires investigation. So vets rely on owners seeking advice, and this could be frustrating for vets if their view of what a problem was didn't align with owners. And vets talked about perceptions that owners' expectations of normal age-related change, as well as barriers such as finances, were factors that stopped them from seeking veterinary advice. And in instances where vets' views of what a problem was and what that solution would be didn't align with owners, they often relied upon their medical training and used different ways to try and achieve compliance to improve that horse's management. So they could draw on medical evidence, try to persuade the owner, follow up with them over time, or in extreme cases, threaten the involvement of welfare organisations. But for owners, each interaction they had with a vet shaped their relationship with the vet and what they felt that vet could offer them. And as I talked about earlier, this relationship in turn shaped an owner's understanding of what they felt a veterinary issue was and what they sought veterinary advice for. And these different factors were important in shaping how that owner saw their vet as a professional and in turn influence how they sought advice. So as one owner describes, previous interactions she'd had with her vet, she felt that they didn't communicate well. And so although she still sought veterinary services here for to have the horse scoped for ulcers, she didn't seek them for discussion. And she describes here that they're not my friends. I don't feel close. I don't feel I could talk to them about anything. I restrict what I discuss with them. And so here, this owner, there was a kind of barrier to her, that exchange of knowledge between owner and vet during a consultation. And you can see how that could shape the way in which care is provided for that horse. And an important part of constructing care was finding solutions for older horses. And as horses got older, owners really valued appropriate companionship and turnout for their horse. But this could become particularly problematic in consultations with vets, where vets were advising restriction or box rest of the horse. And this was one example where owners didn't feel that vets acknowledged the complexity involved in achieving appropriate care for an older horse, particularly one that had many concurrent issues. And this owner wanted more from her vets. But I wanted to do more than that, running out of hay and getting stressed and being worried because she was apart from the others and in a stable and all those things, and looking after her and supporting her and making her comfortable. So successful vet owner relationships relied on generating a contextual and individual understanding of what each owner and vet wanted for their horse. And those good relationships could encourage vet owners to seek veterinary advice in the future. But even in examples where there were good relationships, owners also felt a need to kind of filter the advice they were getting from vets, depending on their individual context. And they also sought other advice through independent research, friends or online groups. And there were many cases where vets were only called upon in rare instances where other solutions failed. And this could be quite hard for vets because if they weren't seeing that horse as frequently, it was difficult for them to contextualize their assessment of the horse because their knowledge of how that horse had changed over time was reduced. So in summary, we found that there was a complex interplay of factors which shaped older horse care. We found that vets provide a service which is situated within a dynamic process of care undertaken by owners. And during lay professional interactions, it was really important that through communication, a contextual understanding of the priorities for an owner were established so that appropriate and achievable solutions were found that aligned with their model of care. And we feel that an awareness of the complexity that shapes vet consults will help vets to tailor their approach to older horse consults. And if you want to find more, I didn't really talk very much about the owner's day-to-day experience that kind of precedes that veterinary consult, but here's a link to my paper here. And thank you very much for listening.
Brilliant. Thank you very much indeed. That was fascinating. I've got so many questions, but we are holding them until all 4 papers, and there's, again, lots of rounds of applause going through from people there. Thank you. So I will now swiftly turn to our third speaker, who is Charlotte Brigden. Charlotte's the Assistant Head of Equine HE at University Centre Myerscough, where she has been teaching and researching with students for 20 years. During this time, she has been involved in a range of research fields, including equine biomechanics, equine nutrition, and eventing horse falls. More recently, Charlotte's research interests have expanded into the social side of the equine industry, and she's currently studying for a PhD with the University of Liverpool, investigating horse owners' experiences of death. Charlotte, thank you. I can see your PowerPoint, no problem.
Perfect. Thank you very perfect. Thank you very much, Erica. And yeah, thank you for the introduction. As came across in the introduction, I am fairly new probably to the social world, so I've a lot to learn as we go through. My PhD actually came about partly as a result of listening to one of our previous speakers, Nora Schuurman, at a conference probably quite a few years ago, who inspired me that this was the area of research that I really wanted to go into. So thank you to Nora for that inspiration a few years ago. So as introduced, the talk that I'm going to talk about today is thinking about how we can use iPoems to hear the voices of equine caregivers at the end of life. So my paper is a little bit different in that it's still very much developmental. So I'm talking about some ideas and some possible developments of analysis rather than being a final end product. Just lost my on button. Okay, so I'm sure that many of us in this room, virtual room now, equine deaths are most often caused by humans. So horses very rarely die naturally. In the majority of cases, horses die as a result of euthanasia being provided for them. And yet, despite this, there is considerable concern in the UK and also internationally that owners are delaying euthanasia, perhaps beyond a point that is appropriate for particular horses. And this is a concern, and therefore as an industry we really need to think about why that is and understand what aspects perhaps could support owners better in order to deal with this decision that they may be facing. So the 4 main reasons why owners may choose to end the life of an equine usually relate to the horse having an unacceptable quality of life, and obviously there's lots of moral issues around how we decide what is acceptable or not, but essentially if the horse has an injury or disease that is incompatible with a good quality of life, horses who have aged again beyond the point where they can be sustained comfortably, horses becoming unwanted or abandoned, and then a human lack of care capacity, and that may be relating to financial or practical resources, or it may be aspects to do with the human themselves. And obviously the recent pandemic highlighted more possible concerns in relation to that. So really we need an extensive development of research into the experiences of humans when they're dealing with horse death in order to inform policy and practice. And actually as a field, this is an area that is vastly expanding. I think since I've been doing my PhD, the amount of research has massively expanded. So it's an area that a lot of people are now interested in. So the aim of my PhD is to provide an extensive examination of the impacts of horse death on human caregivers. So to really understand how dealing with horse death, facing it, leading up to it, and then dealing with it afterwards, actually how that impacts on people involved. So the methodology for collecting data is based on a series of owner interviews, and it uses the method that is described by Wengraf and Chamberlain, and is termed the biographic narrative interpretive method. And this essentially invites people to tell a narrative of a life story. So in this case, it's inviting horse owners to share their story of both the life with a horse and then the death of their horse. And the idea is that the interview is very open, it's very unstructured. The participant is literally just given the opportunity to share their experiences, and then beyond that there's a follow-up series of interviews that carry on. But it enables me to really look in depth at how that story has occurred, how the relationship has developed, and then again the journey that the owner goes through once the horse begins to deteriorate and eventually reaches end of life. So in terms of the data analysis, my main method of data analysis is using really a version of interpretive phenomenological IPA analysis. So I'm conducting a very deep level of coding and then comparing and contrasting, etc., etc. And the initial analysis involves me really looking at how we can map out some of the related themes, some of the aspects that really help to understand what these owners are going through. And many of these aspects that I'm finding already really echo a lot of things that have been discussed in the previous 2 talks, which is quite nice to see that kind of consolidation of ideas. But at the moment, the things that I'm really finding is that the horse owners, a major part of their story relates to the relationship they form with the horse. So this relationship is influenced both by the way in which the human constructs the view of their horse and of their relationship with that horse. So there's a number of different factors that interplay into this, including how they value the agency of the horse, the role that the horse may have played during their critical life events, and the strength of bond and the specialness of the horse, and various other factors as well. But then also the way that the horse-human relationship has actually impacted on the humans. So again, there's a number of ways that this happens, but some of the key aspects include the impact that it has on the identity that the owner sees for themselves. So their identity as a horse owner, as a horse carer, as a horse rider. Sometimes that is mediated by life stage. So an owner who, for example, is retired, an owner who has children who have left home, or perhaps a younger owner that doesn't have children, many of these factors can impact quite strongly on that relationship. Sometimes that relationship can be constructed, deconstructed and reconstructed on often even a daily basis, again sometimes dependent on how that relationship is occurring. And all of these things can impact on the human's equestrian habitus, so their kind of cultural understanding and beliefs. And this whole relationship really then feeds into the experience that the owners then share with me when they're talking about the death of their horse. And within this experience, there are 3 kind of main stages that are clearly identifiable. So the first stage is when the owner talks about how they manage the decline of their horse's health. So I've labelled this as a narrative deterioration that we see in kind of described in human end-of-life studies. And this is where the owners really talk about the way in which they have managed their horse's health and well-being, what they've done to try and keep the horse going as long as possible. And within this, there is a lot of importance for the human about making sure that they have done the best they possibly can. And a lot of the concepts, some of these I've borrowed from, again, previous speakers. So during this stage, the owners are often really talking about the resources that they have available to them, the roles that professionals have supporting them, so they can be vets, they might be physios, they might be trainers, etc. How they've choreographed the care and tinkered their care package in order to maintain life as long as possible. And also the significance of additional agents. So how, for example, partners or fellow caregivers, etc., and the roles that they can have. Once the owner has got to the end of that point, so when they have identified the point at which deterioration has gone beyond the point that they consider to be acceptable, the owner then often talks about the decision to end life. And obviously this is a decision that has many different factors that feed into it. And just some of these are identified on the screen. So how they judge appropriate or acceptable or unacceptable quality of life. Again, the roles that professionals have. So in particular, the roles that people like vets have in terms of helping them to affirm their decision, so the mechanism and timing for that decision. And again, the support that they have received from other people. Having then made that decision, the process of actually arranging the euthanasia, again, is really pivotal to this story, and perhaps more pivotal than I anticipated originally. And during this, some really important aspects include, again, the vet owner relationship. So the kind of the historical and the kind of invested relationship that may have been formed, but again, sometimes doesn't, depending just on the circumstance, the communication between the vet and owner and so on. Other aspects that are important here include the choice of method. So whether the owner decides on having the horse killed by gunshot or barbiturate overdose, etc. And then the practicalities of actually managing the death of a 500 kilo horse. And then we have the day itself. So on the day itself, factors that are important again include the professionals involved. So the competence and the compassion that either the slaughterman or the vet shows, the way in which the owners are able to assure themselves about the horse's well-being, and then also how they're able to appreciate or recognise a good death. So then the final stage, again, that's recognised is the residual impacts of the death on the human. So how that horse's death has impacted on them. And again, a lot of the previous things factor into this. So a lot of the factors around their relationship and their experiences then impact on how they're affected afterwards. But some of the obvious effects also include aspects such as disrupted routines, things slightly more philosophical, such as regrets around missed opportunities or not making the most of the potential of the horse, unresolved dreams, and also the role of memorial goods. So this kind of model is very much a work in progress. I'm still interviewing and still adapting this, but it just shows the kind of main threads and the most important factors that seem to influence. However, whilst I was, during the course of the last few years, again, as researchers, you're constantly hearing and learning about new methods. And I was introduced at a conference to a slightly different method of analysis. And this is described as the listening guide. And the question really underpinning the listening guide is really thinking about how well we hear our participants. So obviously, when we're interviewing, we think that we listen to them really carefully, we transcribe, we scrutinize all the data, but are we really recognizing what they're saying in their voices? So as a researcher, we should contemplate the quality of that listening and how we actually interpret the relationships with our participants and the way we interpret both the voices that are present and their stories. And really as part of this, Brown and Carol Gilligan have presented or published a book called The Listening Guide a number of years ago now. And this guide suggests a method to actually really listen for different voices within an interview. And it places the emphasis on the really psychological complexities of humans by really considering the voice or the voices that are present in that narrative. And that this is done by the creation of what they describe as I poems. So the method itself is, again, a qualitative method. It's very relational, so it's focused on understanding the relations of care. It's voice-centered. It's quite a feminist approach. And the idea is that it provides a meaningful method to really respect the voices and experiences of humans. So it's developed to represent the multiple and complex voices that are often found when relaying emotionally challenging subjects. And clearly, deciding to euthanize your horse and going through with that is one that could be described as very emotional to most people. So the use of the participant's voice through an I poem acts as a tool in order to emotionally engage the audience without the temptation of simplifying a complex narrative into a single linear one. So it aims to keep a lot of that complexity in there. And it does so by using the participant's own language to create an emotionally poignant presentation of the data and to evoke an emotional response from the reader and to enable the participant's voice and their own truth to actually be really clearly seen. So I poems remain very grounded in the data, so they're very closely linked to the original interview data itself. And Brown et al. Justify that this method helps us to really evidence the moral reasoning underpinning an experience or a dilemma. And it does that by identifying the different voices that appear in the way somebody describes something, and that those voices can sometimes show us an abstract notion of justice, often compared to one that portrays more around the relational care side. And that sometimes these dichotomies really show us the conflicted voices of participants. Those conflicted voices may be internal, so there may be an internal dialogue, or they can be the individual, again, relaying conflictions from voices elsewhere externally. So the method itself involves looking at the narrative and identifying separate voices. So the first voice relates the narrative or the plot. So it's very similar to the method that I was using or have been using so far. So understanding the story and the narrative. The second one identifies the I voice. So the second time you kind of look through it, you identify the participant's own sense of self. So how they're identifying themselves and their feelings. And then the third and fourth time helps us to identify those conflicting voices. So the contradictions and the tensions that might be present. So the reason why I think this method is relevant for the stories of horse deaths kind of identifies, or I split into three different areas. So I feel that this method has a lot of value for the participants. It remains very grounded in the data, so it's very close to what the interviewee is describing. It really values their own truth, which of course all qualitative methods do, and that's important to everyone. But the importance of the participants' language is again really emphasised. I also feel it adds value for the analysis of the narrative. So it's really attuned to the multiple and complex voices. So again, it helps identify those contradictory voices. It magnifies some of those contradictions and tensions, and it sustains that complexity. And then for the end user, so the person who may be reading the poem, it really helps for allowing emotional engagement. So just to give a couple of examples, and these are just some extracts. So this first part of the poem was taken from an interviewee who euthanized an aged horse. So the horse was 28, she'd had him for a long time. Oh, sorry, my phone's ringing now. So you can see she's saying here, are we getting to the end of the line? We've done everything. But coming to the end of last summer, it was obvious. Did everything we could to manage him, but you can't change his time. She'd said, we won't get him through this winter. You've made the right decision. We'd always know we'd end up having him euthanized. I don't like it when people say retire them in a field. I don't think that's fair or kind. I was always taught it's the last kind thing you could do. That last week he was tired, he'd had enough. So what I kind of pull from this, in that first section, we can see that abstract notion of justice. So what, have they done everything they possibly can? Have they got to the right time for the horse? Compared to that relational care, we've done everything we possibly can, but we can't change his time. So it's that real kind of those contradictions again. And we've got multiple voices. So we've got here somebody external, an external agent saying, you're making the right decision. We can't do any more. And then we've got these contradictions and tensions. So in this case, it's a contradiction against that this participant sees when she thinks about other people and what other people do and how other people behave. And again, that links very closely to some of the earlier talks today. So just to illustrate how this can be constructed, this sample is taken from quite a different interview. So this was an interview with an owner who had to euthanize a horse at a much younger age. So she tried everything with this horse. And you can see what I've done here is to just show an example or an extract from the transcripts, and then the aspects that I pulled out to actually then put into the poem. So the other horse, Jess, totally different. I think she'd be the only one of all the horses I've lost that I've lost before its time, which I did struggle a bit more to get my head around. So you can see from that, I really identified her showing her consideration about this horse being the only one that's different and it was lost before its time. So again, there's that aspect of what's justice, what's right. And then I said, I'm taking her to Vet B, Clinic B, and he said, you're wasting your money. So again, in here, we've got quite a conflict with an external voice. Interestingly, I presented this talk yesterday with some local colleagues, and one of the other observers questioned whether there was quite an aspect around gender within here, and that's something that I've not looked at in a lot of depth yet, but I think maybe perhaps it is in terms of relational care. And then the final bit, he said that he'd been to a seminar in September and the ligament snip didn't work. It was, a waste of time. And I said, well, what would you recommend? And he shrugged his shoulders at me. I'll never forget that. He shrugged his shoulders at me. I've never spoken to him since. So again, I think in here, some really key voices that really show how this participant is making sense of what has happened. And again, just to put that into context, again, we've got this real abstract notion of justice. We've got the multiple and conflicted voices and those contradictions and tensions. So just to quickly show you, because I'm conscious of time, just a final part of this, and this is the same person So I put on my Facebook wall, I said, she's got a really big leg, she's going to be scanned. I really don't know what to do. So again, real complexity within there. My own friend saying, no one's going to judge you. I'm not asking whether people are going to judge me. I'm not bothered what anyone else thinks. I don't know why I put that post on. So that portion, there's so many conflicted voices within there. The vet says I've done enough for her and she's totally behind me if I put her to sleep. Surprisingly, so is my mum, but I don't know if I'm behind my own decision. So again, the contradictions and the tensions and the participants' own truth becoming very apparent. So just by way of conclusions, just to kind of answer the question, can iPhones help us to better hear the voices of equine caregivers? As you can see on the screen, I've got a kind of a working model about how I believe owners are experiencing this process, but I do feel that adding this extra dimension helps us to really analyse the moral reasoning that is evidenced by these dichotomies that are heard through those conflicted voices. And I also think that it provides an emotionally engaging presentation of data, and perhaps that might be a potential owner resource for owners in future who might want to be able to empathise and understand and feel how other people might feel. So thank you very much for listening. On the screen is just some of the no longer with us participants whose owners very kindly spoke to me about their experiences. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Charlotte. That's fantastic. Sesi, can I invite you to show your face and bring up your screen now, please? Thank you. So Sesi Ma, our final speaker, is a PhD candidate for area studies at Kyoto University, the Graduate School of Asian and African Area Studies. She's currently working on a project in regard to the interconnection between the Imperial Wars and Japanese Racing Association, as well as interspecies entanglements between retired racing horses and human in Tamba, Japan. Before the pandemic, she did field work in the Nepal Himalayas, where free-ranging mountain dogs navigate different forms of power and build their lives next to large-scale hydropower dam projects. I can see your screen brilliantly, so off you go, Sesi.
Thank you so much for introducing me, Erica. My name is Sesi Ma, and today I'm going to talk about a pair of human-horse entanglement in an NGO for retired racehorse that I did field work with in Japan. The state-founded Japan Racing Association oversees the production of thoroughbred horse in Japan. Every year, around 7,000 horses are produced, while 5,000 horses are retired due to injury or underperformances. The lucky ones are then purchased to start a second career in riding clubs and sightseeing facilities, while the rest are sent to meat processing plant. No more than 6,000 horses in the nation are currently registered in a riding club. In other words, most retired horses become meat horse. There are only a few NGOs and associations in Japan that provide lifetime rehabilitation for retired horses. And this presentation is based on ethnographic study conducted as a member of one of such NGOs in Tamba, Kyoto. Using the concept of touch, this presentation analyzed an evolving relationship of care between a human and a horse and raised questions on the category of care in human-animal studies and relational ethics in general. There are 4 horses living in Tamba Horse Club: Brigden, Neo, Mirage, and Eden. All of them are born and castrated in facilities involved with the racing industry in Hokkaido. Brigden and Mirage retired due to underperformances, while Neo and Eden never made it to the competitive debut after training since 1 year old. Eden is the youngest member. Born in 2014, he came to the club right through training facility of JRA in 2019. Neo shares the same story as he came in 2017. Brigden was auctioned to a riding club after retirement and was extremely underweight upon his arrival in 2015. Mirage was luckier as he came straight from his retirement auction in 2016. Just as divergent background, they all have distinctive yet endearing personalities. The club is founded by local farmers who are in their 70s.
Sorry to interrupt, Sesi.
Yes.
Are you moving your PowerPoint because it's not moving on the screen?
Oh, sorry.
That's okay. That's okay.
Did you see this slide?
No, we didn't.
No, sorry. Okay. Thank you for telling me that. Okay. Okay, I'm on the 3rd slide now. Thank you. The club is founded by local farmers who are in their 70s. All the daily routine are performed on a volunteer basis, and most members come once a week. The current director, Kobayashi-san, comes to the club every day and is in charge of all duties of the day. Due to limited funding, the horses in the club still have to work in occasional riding lessons, except in the case of sickness and aging. By the time I arrive at the club for my cleaning shift on Monday mornings, it is easy to spot Kobayashi-san's slender figure in the stall, with the fresh wind carrying sweet smell of hay passing through the barn. After saying good morning to Kobayashi-san, I will deliver the second half of breakfast to everybody's stall, a kilogram of hay, together with more tasty nutrition cubes made with barley and soybeans, along with vitamin, calcium, and mineral supplements flavored by mint. By this time, Brigden would have already been finishing the first half of his breakfast, and sometimes eaten too, while Neo will be halfway, and Mirage barely started eating. Mirage always makes a hole in the center of the hay and gradually dives down. After reaching the bottom, he will gradually expand the radius of the hole and finish eating elegantly in this order. In the calming waves of crunching sounds, I will start cleaning the stall for Mirage and Neo and take a bath for them when they come back from a walk. The incident happened one day when I finished my duties early. As I volunteered to clean Eden's stall as well, Kobayashi-san stopped me with a smile. Don't worry, I will do it later. I think he will kick you if you enter his stall. You're still a stranger to him. I was surprised. Am I still a stranger to him? Every morning, when I say good morning to Eden in front of his door, he will reach out from the bottom of the fence until his lip almost touched my hand. During cleaning time, Eden will often make a protesting sound by pulling his food basket away and suddenly release it towards the wall, as carrots are not delivered until Mirage comes back from his walk. I could only sneak a barley cube or two under Eden's confronting eyes, hoping that it will quiet down further protests, which thankfully often wins his understanding. That is why I have always thought of Eden as curious, expressive, and understanding. I could hardly picture Eden kick me even when he's frightened. 3 weeks later, a senior member posted a before and after video of Eden on Instagram. It is a video of Eden and Kobayashi-san in January 2021, almost 2 years after his arrival, and another video in September 2021, which is 8 months later. And here's the video. I think it's safer if we just watch it from Instagram. Sorry. So this is when the first video in January 2021. And this is the second video in September 2021. And this is both Eden with Kobayashi-san. A close member in the club told me that when Eden just arrived in April 2019, he will kick anyone who attempts to enter his stall. One experienced member broke his leg in one of these incidents, and that is why Kobayashi-san carried on sole responsibility for Eden's daily routine. The life history of Eden includes what he has experienced at JRA's breeding center, what he has learned at JRA's training facility, and what he has possibly suffered along the journey as a very young horse. It is possible that he has been trained by outdated practices or has not experienced a relationship of trust with human handlers. Needless to say, getting to know Eden needs continuous effort and extended period of time. It could only be achieved in a one-to-one relationship based on mutual communication. I wondered how Eden became to feel relatively safe around Kobayashi-san in such a short time. I asked Kobayashi-san the question, and his reflections are thought-provoking. Before going to Kobayashi-san's complementation, excuse me, I want to introduce the concept of touch that is relevant to his answer. Johanna Gottfried van Herder, the 18th century German philosopher, discussed his view on touch in his 1778 book, The Theory of Sculpture. He proposed that the sense of touch plays a fundamental role in this world, which sight and hearing could not provide us. It can grab something deep inside the subject. In order to explain this power of touch, Herder makes two major arguments. First, the subject speaks to the touching hand. Second, it is possible for the touching hand to sense what is happening inside the subject through movement. In order to understand Herder's argument of the speaking sculpture, it is important to make a reference to Ferenc Froebel, German paleology, who created kindergarten and education toys known as Froebel gifts. Froebel proposed that for infants' development, it is important to hold something in one's hand and play with it as opposed to observing it. Grabbing small stones and fallen branches, picking them up, rotating them, or rubbing them could be very important learning. That is due to the fact that the quality of the object, which are often invisible, might only be brought out and learned through touch. Froebel gifts is therefore created based on this finding. Building on Froebel thought, Japanese philosopher Asa Ito suggests that this capacity to draw out invisible qualities applies to the sense of touch in general. She used the example of a Japanese sweet called daifuku to demonstrate how the quality of the object is drawn out by the touching hand. I will switch to a chocolate brownie here. When we pick up a brownie, we feel its softness. The softness is drawn out by the action of touch, as one could not sense it through observation. Similar phenomenon occurs frequently, as we are used to select the method of touch based on the kind of information we wish to know. For example, if we want to know how firm an avocado is, we'll press it with our fingers under a certain amount of pressure, not too strong to squeeze it. When someone we care feels sick and we want to know if they have fever, we will gently place our hand on their forehead and stay still until we feel the temperature. We wouldn't use the same method of touch to pick an avocado or to test for fever. These daily examples demonstrate that, based on different methods of touch, we draw out different information or quality of the subject. What Herder means by movement is not necessarily a physical movement either, but instead a movement of the feelings, such as emotional urge or a sudden passion, which is similar to the concept of momentum or vector in mathematics. It is an invisible presence that is yet manifested as specific movements of the body or facial expression. Herder proposed that a touching hand can grasp this presentiment. Instead of color or proportion that can be perceived by observation, the touching hand can grasp this eternal stream of life running deep inside. According to Herder, this is the essential role that sense of touch plays in our life. The sight stops on the surface, but touch invites an adventure within. A living body becomes transparent through touch. To interpret Herder's stream of life in daily languages, Itoasa used an example of hug between she and her child. When her child runs into her embracing arms, she could feel whether he wants to leave and play in the park once more or enjoy a prolonged moment of safety in her embrace. If he pushed against her arm continuously, it is an invitation to play contest of strength. If he screams, let me go, without pushing against her arms, then the mode of play he wants is to mess around. If he gives her all his weight, he wants to go home and rest. It is possible for her to recognize what her child wants solely based on the sense of touch. Ito further introduced two vocabularies of touch in Japanese. Though both translated into touch in English, they have different meanings and connotations. The first one is sawaru, and the second is fureru. When a wood is being touched, sawaru indicates a lack of willingness to think about others' feelings and gives out a sense of pain, while fureru delivers the image of checking the wood's condition gently and applying medication. During the meeting, when a topic is touched, fureru indicates a sense of inclusion, a willingness to engage with the topic, while sawaru suggests an unwillingness to disclose everything about the topic. In other words, sawaru indicates a one-sided intention to make contact without attentive observation or interaction, while fureru suggests attentiveness and an involving interaction between two living selves. Then let's come back to Kobayashi-san's recount of Eden's story. In his memory, Eden will attempt to kick him whenever he enters his store from the first day in April 2019. The only thing he can do is to continue the daily routine of cleaning, making sure Eden can see both of his hands and explain to him in gentle voice what he wants to do, why he needs to do so, and guarantee that he will not hurt him. He insisted entering Eden's store despite his resistance because Eden was extremely underweight. A health check and a clean living environment that lowers the risk of infection was considered necessary. However, a vet would often refuse to see a horse that seems to be aggressive, in official language, performing habitual kicking. That is why Kobayashi-san wants to gain Eden's trust so that he might be calm during the checkup with his accompany. It is not until several months later that Eden stopped to kick Kobayashi-san constantly. When Kobayashi-san made sure to keep distance during cleaning, then Eden will also maintain distance inside the store and only kick from time to time. This situation lasted for another month. However, with summer pollen, it became necessary to brush Eden's coat. With Kobayashi-san's new attempt to touch him, Eden responded by kicking whenever he can again. Kobayashi-san could only repeatedly attempt to brush out the sweat, dirt, and dung while explaining to Eden gently again what he wants to do, why he's doing so, and where on his body he's going to touch next. These messages did not seem to be reaching Eden for another 2 months, until one day when Eden did not kick Kobayashi-san anymore when his back was being brushed. Kobayashi-san said that he could almost sense that Eden was bearing his fear for him, though he did not know why Eden was willing to make such a difficult effort. This lasted for another several weeks, and then gradually the area expanded to the flank. Then bit by bit, in the course of half a year, Eden seemed to feel okay when Kobayashi-san touched his stomach, his neck, and his entire body, except for his legs. He will kick reflexively if legs were touched. And this lasted until January this year. Another half a year passed until Eden seemed to become more comfortable when Kobayashi-san cleaned his hoof, while Kobayashi-san remained the only human who can enter his store. So a traditional discourse of care in human animal studies might describe the story between Eden and Kobayashi-san in the following way. There is an empathic and experienced human who has embodied knowledge of careful attentiveness and listened to the specific animal other in his own voices, which open up possibilities of understanding and responding. However, thinking with Herder's concept of touch and Ito's introduction of fulelu and sawaru, does such discourse of care justly portray the whole picture of the story? Though we cannot talk to Eden directly, it is safe to assume that through Kobayashi-san's touching hand and gentle voice, Eden grasped the emotions and intentions behind the daily intrusion into his store. If Kobayashi-san's attempt to brush Eden's coat have always felt as a violent behavior, then Eden's reaction will stay the same, to protect himself from all means. The attempt to brush Eden's coat could be described by sawaru instead of fulelu because there's neither involving interaction nor mutual communication at that stage. However, during the course of cleaning, Kobayashi-san gradually gained subtle knowledge, such as where to stand and where not to touch. Something along the journey turned it from an action of sawaru to fulelu. However, if Eden has not been courageous enough to try understanding Kobayashi-san's actions, these adjustments wouldn't be picked up. It is Eden who took the first vulnerable step of trust to allow him to enter the store. Eden might feel betrayed after Kobayashi-san began to touch him shortly after being allowed into the store. Still, Eden was able to actively sense Kobayashi-san's intentions and overcome the fear. Then once again, Eden trusted Kobayashi-san with his back, and then with his flank, his stomach, his butt, step by step. Eden's agency could be fully seen here. He practiced attentiveness and engaged with Kobayashi-san, listening to a human in his own voice, using sensory that he does not often do when interacting with non-humans. And this is what traditional discourse of caring might have missed while describing a human-animal entanglement, that more than human selves is not always the one being attended to. They can play both the role of the one caring and the one cared for. That's all of my presentation. Thank you so much for listening.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. It was nice to end with a positive, some sad stuff going on. Lots of rounds of applause there. I have